Okay, so let's just get started. Have you always been into rowing? I mean, I know that you kind of got started once you got to college. Did
Yeah.
you know anything about the sport going in?
I had very little insight into the sport going into college. In high school, I actually played softball I had played softball for 14 years leading up to college and wanted to play softball in college and probably could have walked on a D1 team, but ended up choosing Bryn Mawr, which did not have softball as a sport. And so then I was actually going to play soccer um, in college. And I reached out to the soccer coach at Bryn Mawr. And she responded that I had reached out a little too late for the season, preseason training. So I'd have to pay an extra $100. And I was like, nope, that's okay. I'll go walk onto the rowing team. Because there were two sports at Bryn Mawr that you didn't have to have previous experience for, rowing being one of them and badminton being the other. And I had always wanted to try rowing. I knew a little bit about it, not much. And so I was getting my mail one day, saw someone with a Bryn Mawr cruise shirt on and was like, hey, just stop them. And asked them, and they told me to come to tryouts. And that was the beginning of the end. No.
So, were you rowing with girls who had years and years of like club experience?
A couple of the women that I was rowing with had some experience from high school, but it was a rarity to have high school experience or have prior experience in rowing. Bryn Mawr definitely was not known for their athletics.
And then speaking of athletics, did you see that kind of math background translate into competitive sport?
I'm going to tell you a quick story about how I got that math background real quick.
Bring it on.
But basically, this like explains me in a nutshell. I went into college undecided as a major, and it was the day before study abroad applications were due, sophomore year. Or it was the day that the applications were due. And I was going to submit my application to study abroad because people had always told me you want to study abroad in college. And you'll regret it if you don't. So I was like, oh my God, I got to submit this application. And they told me I had to have a major advisor's signature. And I was like, well, shoot, what do I have enough courses in to major in? And it was either math or chemistry, and it was tough to go abroad in chemistry. So I became a math major. Knowing that I could do anything with a math major. At the time, I wanted to study veterinary medicine, but that's another story in and of itself. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please continue.
I was just going to say, so I think that like having the math major, it's not like math is in my genetics, I think. I mean, my mom was a statistician, my grandma was a calculus teacher, like my dad's economics. It's in my genetics, but I would have seen myself going as like a biology major in college. And so to say that like I kind of found a relation with it to rowing, maybe a little bit more like physics wise. But I wouldn't say that it was like math was like the end all to be all of what I was studying in college.
Yeah. And then can you talk me kind of through the positions that you worked through in the boat? Because you were in a couple different positions during college.
Yeah, so I actually started out my freshman year. I was a little upstart. And I started out as a rower in the boat and actually ended up making the varsity crew my novice year in the bow seat, which is the person that like when you see a boat going down the course, it's the person that is like sitting backwards, but in the front of the crew. So like closest to the finish line, but they're sitting backwards because all rowers sit backwards. And so then my sophomore year, I moved from that seat up to, I have to remember, oh my gosh, it was so long ago. God, I just aged myself. So from that seat, I moved up to stroke seat, actually, 7 seat and stroke seat, which is closest to the coxswain. And a stroke seat is the one sort of leading, setting the rhythm for the boat. And so I actually stroked head of the Charles Regatta, which is a major race in Boston, my sophomore year of college. And then spring of my sophomore year ended up injuring myself while I was rowing. And my little upstart nature was like, oh, I just had a major shooting pain down my leg and I can't put pressure on it. I'm going to row the rest of the week. And so I like probably damaged my back even more at that point. But basically that's what took me out of competitive rowing. But I wanted to stay in the sport and I just happened to be bossy and short. So I was like, well, I might as well do the thing that my body type was meant to do in some regards. Let me go try coxing. And so that's sort of how I got into that coxing position.
So spring 2008 was the herniated disc.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to realize, okay, this is going to change what I'm doing completely?
Probably most of the season, most of that spring. I was hoping it would get better. And I would go to every single practice, just like cheer people on kind of thing. And I probably painted every single oar in the boathouse that spring. It was rough. It was not what I had signed up to do, but I was super committed to the sport by that point, and hoping that I could get back on the water. But it just, by the end of that spring, it just wasn't getting much better. And like trying to row on the rowing machines just wasn't working that well. And so summer that year, I ended up coaching and coxing a little bit. And that's where I really started kind of learning the ropes of coxing. I did a little bit of coxing that spring, but not a ton. And then summer is when I really got into it that year.
So are herniated discs a common injury for rowers?
I think that yes, in regards to like you would think, I don't know, football concussion. Rowing back injuries are very common because of the load that you put on your back. And if you're not properly fit or have the appropriate technique when you row, you put even more strain on your lower back. And when you don't tell the coach that you injured yourself and keep rowing on it, it puts even more strain. And so I think that it's definitely like a common injury. I wouldn't say it's like injuries in rowing are very much overuse injuries. And so it could be like overuse shoulder, overuse back, overuse hips, whatever. But I would say back's probably the most common.
And then you said that you were perfect for coxing. Why? Is there a type of personality that succeeds more so than others? I mean, are you just naturally extroverted or all?
Well, so
like,
I'm definitely like an extroverted introvert. I'm very outgoing, but I like re-energize by myself. And so I think with coxing, I mean, generally you're looking for a shorter individual that weighs max 120 pounds or minimum 120 pounds. Maximum, there's not really a max, but you want to weigh as close to that 120 pound mark as you can. And so that was sort of physically, I was that body type. And then kind of personality wise, in high school, I was actually very much put into a leadership role because I was like queen of marching band, kind of thing. Queen of the band geeks is what they called me. I was drum majorette in high school and pretty much led like 100-member band throughout my senior year. And so that translated those leadership skills that I learned in that translated really well into coxing. Because as a coxswain, you almost have to walk the fine line of being an athlete, but also being a coach. And it's like you're being basically pulled down the race course by your rowers, while they're going through immense amounts of stress and pain and putting it all out there, and you're screaming at them to go. And like, if you don't contribute to that, and if you don't walk that fine line appropriately, some rowers hate coxswains. And in my opinion, that's kind of because they haven't had great coxswains, or the coxswains themselves for the boats haven't been coached appropriately. So
how do you walk that line of communication but not screaming the entire time?
I think it takes a mutual respect. I think that an easy way to do it when you are first getting started in coxing is when the rowers do any lifting workouts or indoor workouts, you work out with them. You don't just sit on the sideline, unless the coach calls you over, tells you to do something, of course, but you kind of earn that respect with them because they're like, oh, okay. But then also treating them like athletes, like, and treating yourself like an athlete. You're not above any rower in the boat as a coxswain. You all have a job to do. And by ensuring that you do that job, like, I feel like a lot of coxswains tend to be like, I'm in charge now. But you're not really, in a way. And so I think by realizing that and communicating in that manner versus like, oh yeah, I'm second in command under the coach, it's going to help the rowers gain a respect for you. And then also listening to the rowers. I think it's like any management system. When you have an upper level manager, you have to listen to your lower level employees. Or if you have someone managing peers, you have to listen to your peers for feedback, and you have to be open to that. Not necessarily walking all over you, like you expect them to put out and they expect you to put out, but you also have to have that expectation of them. So it's like a give and take. And once you figure out that balance, that's how you walk the fine line.
I was reading an article with you from a while ago, and you were talking about the difference between constant communication with the women in the boat versus staying quiet and just letting them work through it. That's another line that I feel like you have to walk in a different way.
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, the best advice that I ever got when I first started coxing was talk 80% less. Because what you say, every word that you say in the boat, if you talk too much and you're constantly communicating with them, it's like anything. It's like white noise to them. But if you give them that time to sort of process what you just said and then say, yes, you got it, good, it's working, and then shut up again, and give them time to process what you just said, that works so much better than just sort of word vomit. And it really helps sort of dial in what you're saying too, because then that also gives you time to think about what your next command is going to be. What does the boat feel like? Because as a coxswain, you're feeling that boat movement. And so how does the boat move?
You're also steering, essentially.
Yeah, that's kind of like the third job or the first job when you first learn how to cox is you need to be able to steer a straight line, which sounds really easy, but is really, really hard when you have a boat with different oars going in at different times, different pressures being applied at different times. It can be really challenging to steer a straight line. And so, yeah, we actually have, in an 8-person boat, you have little lines on either side of where you're sitting, and they're connected to a rudder under the boat. And then in a 4-person boat, you can either have those lines or you can have a lever if you're in a bow-loaded coxed boat with the rudder. So
how quickly are you dispensing these kind of directions?
The directions themselves, the steering directions
are so how quickly are you wanting that direction to be implemented?
So I would say probably like voice directions.
Yeah, I mean, are we talking split second? Are we talking like 20 meters away?
I would say usually it depends. It really depends on the situation. If you're in practice, generally speaking, you'll say like in 2, which means in 2 strokes, do this command. If you are in a race, it really depends. Sometimes it can be like, I don't know, give me 5 strokes on this one. And then there you have to execute that command right then and there. And usually it's like, give me 5 strokes to get your catches in. We'll say something like that on this one, because it's needed urgently to get ahead of another boat or to do something else. If it's not needed quite so urgently, you can say in 2 to really prepare your boat and get them together. But once you've honed that communication, generally speaking, it's within like 5 seconds.
I don't normally speak to athletes who are in that much synchronicity. I mean, I talk to team sport athletes, but I mean, this is a new level of being on the same page.
Yeah.
How do you organize all of those people?
I mean, I have a little role in that as a coxswain. The coach also has a little role in that. I think as a coxswain, the best things that you can do are, I mean, you're kind of the in the boat coach. So you can feel exactly what's going on in the boat and be able to give them coaching while they're in the boat. Like, oh, two seat, get your blade in, you're a little late on the catch. Or stroke seat, start with the legs, you're opening your back a little too soon on the drive. Because you can kind of feel that difference in the boat. And the coach also gives those directions during practice to change whatever the rower is doing to match up with the other rowers. There's also like gadgets that you can use if you want to. But as a coxswain, I think one of the main ways that you unite people in the boat is actually outside of the boat too. I think that a crew that's going to be really good generally has good rapport with each other. I know in my crew for Rio, we were best friends. Like the entire boat loved each other. And in my crews before that and after that, like the boat loved each other. And it showed. We did really well. I remember before my world championship race in 2015, we ended up losing by 0.26 seconds, which also sucks. But when we were at the starting line, and I remember going to my crew like, you guys are awesome, love you guys, let's go. And then it was awesome. Like it was a great race, and it was just that sort of camaraderie that really helped us sync up in the boat too, and made it easier for us to make changes, expect what I was going to say in the boat, expect what the crew members would do in response to what I was saying, that sort of thing.
How do your directions change when you're in like a neck and neck part of the race?
I think it depends where you are in the race. Because generally coxing, it like we break the race up into like 4 quadrants, so 4 or 500 meter segments for 2,000 meter. Or when I was racing in Rio, it was only 1,000 meters. Now it's 2,000. But so you break it up into quadrants. The first quadrant is all about just sort of getting your crew up and moving, getting them into a steady rhythm. Second quadrant is more about like seeing where the field is at, that sort of thing. And so your calls are a little more like stern, but not necessarily like screaming at a crew, because you don't want them to go full out. And even if they're neck and neck with somebody, it's more about keeping them relaxed when they're neck and neck with somebody in the second and third 500s. And it's more about giving them the confidence to know that they can push through that other boat. And then in the fourth 500, we do what's called a sprint in the last like 250, 300 meters. And that's where you sort of start ramping up your energy, because by that point, the rowers are exhausted, not hearing anything, because they're like past the point of the pain cave. And so you say really short, quick things, if really sternly, really forcefully, get them going. I mean, when we were in Rio, outside of a malfunction with the equipment on the last race, but like in the first couple races, like the crowd was cheering so loudly, you can't hear the coxswain. And so it's like, you have to be loud, you have to be short, sharp with what you're saying. At that point, if you're neck and neck, there's no time for long sentences. You just got to get them in sync ASAP, get them relaxed up the slide if you can, even at that point. And so it really depends on where you are in the race.
Do you have communication with the coach, or does that person just let you go?
Nope. In a race, as soon as you shove off the dock, you have no communication with the coach. Like they can bike next to you at the world championships and scream at you kind of thing, but you don't hear them. Like you're so in tune with your race, you do not hear the coaches. Maybe the rowers do. I don't know. I've never row as a rower at a world championships, but as a coxswain, you're just so in tune with your race, like you can't hear a thing anyone's saying.
Let's talk about the half an hour morning before a race.
Mm-hmm.
What's going through your head? What are you preparing? How much of that monologue is with your boat versus with yourself?
When I first started coxing internationally, a lot of that monologue was by myself, because it's nerve-wracking. And I don't want those nerves to be shown to the crew at all. And also I need to get into my zone. So usually what would be like optimal for me as a coxswain would be to show up maybe 10, 15 minutes before the crew gets there, get into my zone first. And that usually involves like some visualization of what might take place during the race, something like that. And then when the crew gets there, that's when you sort of come out of your zone and go into boat zone. And that's like optimal for me. Does that ever happen? Not usually. Like I would love that, but it's never really that like great. But a lot of times what does happen is the coach will ask you as a coxswain to stay behind and help rig the boat or help make sure everything, all of the nuts and bolts are tight on the boat. And then the crew goes up and does their like physical warm up and like initial warm up before you get in the boat to do your race warm up. And so then once everything's tight, that'll be like my time to like kind of get into my zone, and then I can go over to the crew once that's all done.
So you're visualizing a race and you have no idea what's about to happen. What kind of things are you focusing on in that visualization? Because you don't really have a set routine. Things can change so quickly.
You have some idea of how it might unfold. And so that's not like the only time as a coxswain I would visualize what I was saying. And I would actually say it like to myself kind of thing in the tone that I wanted to say it. And so with each visualization that you do, I make it slightly different than the one before so that I can account for most of the situations that might happen or might unfold during a race. And so like, I mean, even for our final Rio final, I visualized the exact race that happened in one of my things. And I remember in the middle of the final, I was like, oh my God, this is what I visualized. Let's go. Except the stern pair couldn't hear me in the boat for the final. And so half the boat couldn't hear me, half the boat could hear me a little bit, but I couldn't hear the stern pair speaker because they were furthest away from me. And so I didn't know that their speaker wasn't working. Otherwise I would have screamed. So that was basically almost worse in our boat than not having a coxswain. And I remember being in the race and I was like, I had visualized this. I knew exactly what I was going to call. I called it and nothing happened. And so that was like, what's going on? So I kept calling out at the end of the race, the strokes. He was like, I couldn't hear you the entire race. And I was just like, what? But it just goes to how much our boat loved each other and how in sync we were with each other, that we were still able to come in second by only 2 seconds. And so it's like that sort of thing. It's like all of the practice, we always practice like we're going to race. You don't change anything for the race. And so because of that, we were able to still get second place. But yeah, it's like you can only visualize so much.
How has your approach to leadership changed since the 6th place finish in 2010?
I think in 2010, I mean, a lot has happened since 2010. 2010 was sort of like my first soiree at the national team level. And I'm not even sure, like, it all just seems like a blur when I think back at it. Just because it's just like, I think my leadership style has stayed the same, but my skills have been honed with leadership. I think the main time that I can remember my coxing and my leadership in coxing changing was after my 2013 final, actually, in South Korea. And the rowers kind of started coming down on their coxing, which is a common thing when you lose and like you're not happy, blah, 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 blah. We came in 4th. It wasn't horrible, but they were just like, oh, Jenny, you could have called this better. You could have called this better, whatever. And I actually got really distressed after that. And I went out to the coach and I started talking to the coach at the time. And she was like, you have to remember that it's not just the rowers expecting you to perform, but you have to make them accountable too. Like, you have to expect them to perform too and have that view. Like, it's a two-way street here. It's not just them coming down on you. It's like, you didn't perform maybe, but they didn't perform either. And that's when my leadership style changed. And I started asking for more from my rowers and expecting more from my rowers, and they started expecting more from me. And I think that is really when I started changing my coxing style and becoming more of a leader in the boat. And I like to do a lot of leading by example too. Like, if I get there early, great, that's what I need. I don't like to yell at people. I don't like to reprimand people. That's not the type of leader I am. I'm like, okay, you showed up late for a practice. How can we fix this next time? Do we need to do bathroom break 10 minutes before the race instead of 5? Like, how can we adjust this to make this work for us?
Well, it ended up working because you went on a 3-year string of silver medals.
More than that. It was 5.
Incredible. I'm glad that I'm wrong about that. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we started, our first silver was in 2014 in Amsterdam. And then 2015 was the 0.26 second race. 2016 was the 2-second microphone go off race. And then 2017 was in Florida, and we came in silver again there. And then 2018 was in Bulgaria, and we got silver again there, and they've gotten silver ever since. So my motto is actually, I'm a viewer of the gold lining because I'm sick and tired of silver.
I like that. Now let's talk about adaptive rowing classifications.
Yeah.
Admittedly, this is new to me. Can you walk me through how the Paralympic Committee dictates those classifications?
Definitely. So prior to, oh gosh, I don't know what year changed over, but when I first started in Paralympic athletic or Paralympic rowing, it was known as LTA, TA, and AS, which stands for leg, trunk, and arms, was one classification, meaning you could use your full body. Trunk and arms was the second classification, which means that you're in a fixed seat, your legs are strapped down, and you can swing with your body and use your arms, but you can't use your legs. And then arms and shoulders, which means you're strapped in at like your waist kind of thing, like right under your bust line. And you can really only use your arms and shoulders to row. And I don't know when that changed. I forget the exact year. Might have been 2013. I don't know, 20, whatever. But it changed to match up with other Paralympic sports a little more. So now it's known as PR1, 2, and 3. So PR3 is like what used to be LTA, what used to be leg, trunk, and arms, full body rowing. This could be like a club foot. It could be a visual impairment. It could be like, we've had Erb's palsy in the boat. We've had one limb smaller than the other, less flexion, whatever, something to do like that. But basically these athletes have to go through a classification. And when they're classified, there's a physical therapist and a classifier there, and they take them through kind of rigmarole. And based on the amount of use they have of their limbs, they are classified into whatever category. So PR2 would be the trunk and arms, and PR1 would be the arms and shoulders.
And then how do you get involved in that?
So the coxswain themselves do not have to classify, and do not have to be have a classifiable disability. And that the theory behind that is that we're not physically doing anything in the boat. And so I actually didn't realize that when I first started, until like I got recruited to start, which is another story about kind of how I got involved in Paralympic athletics, Paralympic rowing. But yeah, I think as a coxswain, it's different. And like, even in the Rio Games, I don't know if this was true for Tokyo, but in the Rio Games, I was considered an athlete competition partner, kind of like a guide runner would be for the athletes. In the Olympics, the coxswain was an athlete. but in the Paralympics, they're athlete competition partner because they don't classify, which is really interesting differentiation.
Yeah, it is. And so now we're going to talk about how you got into adaptive rowing. You had a coach approach you.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of crazy, but basically I started out in college, and I say that, like, yes, I've gotten a little bit lucky, but I've also made the opportunity for myself. Because when I was going into my spring of my junior year, I was in spring of my junior year in college, and I was planning that summer is like April, and college ends in May kind of thing. And I was actually planning that summer to go coach with another coach back at my home club over the summer, that sort of thing. And so I was actually helping them out at regattas in the Philadelphia area. And at the last race, this person professed his love to me, this coach. And he was like 50-year-old coach, professed his love to me. And yeah, basically I realized later that he had been like grooming me and everything. Yeah. And so I went home that day, crying, everything like that. Was sitting in my room in college and was like, what am I going to do this summer? And I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to apply to pre-elite boat clubs and follow a dream. And so I applied to probably 4 or 5 pre-elite boat clubs, got into one, Vesper in Philadelphia. Realized I was going to spend my time in Philadelphia, applied to work at the Philadelphia Zoo because I wanted to be a veterinarian. Found one job raising baby turtles all summer, which sounds great, but it's really boring. And so I ended up coxing at Vesper Boat Club for the pre-elite team there. So I would go to practice in the morning, work all day, go to practice in the afternoon. But like I said, I like to give myself as much opportunity as possible and get as good as I can. So I ended up coxing for the masters team, which is age like 21 and older, in the morning, early morning, like 5 a.m., going to pre-elite practice at 7 a.m., working all day, and then pre-elite in the evening. And so with the masters team, I actually went to Masters Nationals Championships, and I was going to cox an 8. And the coach told me, hey, your stroke seat's out, new stroke seat's in, listen to whatever she says. And I was like, okay, whatever. Because I'm a little upstart still, like as a junior in college. I know what I'm doing. And so I ended up warming up with this person telling me, I'm like, okay, can you just stop talking? Like, I know what I'm doing. Thank you. I didn't say that to her, but I was like, that was my mentality, which is very pompous and not normally me, but I'm also like confident when I'm in the boat. So, and then we go down the race course and she's like, oh, hey, that was great. Can I get your name and number? And I was like, sure. Like, I'll cox for Vesper again. That's a great opportunity. And 2 weeks later, I got an email from her being like, I'm the adaptive national team coach, and I'd like to invite you to some development camps. And so that's how I got my start in para rowing.
So that was a test.
In a way, I guess. I had no clue what was going on. I just did my thing. And she was like, come to development camps. And then I got invited to selection camp in 2010, made the team that year, went to New Zealand, and then actually missed out on the team in 2011 and 2012. And she ended up, I think she got let go, that coach, but then moved all around the US, and yeah, we can get into that. But
that's awesome.
It's like, that's why I say, like, I'm lucky, but I'm also not, because I gave myself that opportunity.
Right. I mean, we're not ones on this podcast to delegitimize accomplishments. So but let's talk about coxing adaptive athletes, because in the same article that I read, you were like, it's just so different because you can't tell a blind athlete to do some of the things that,
Yeah.
I mean, there are just natural limitations based on their abilities. How did you have to shift your communication style to fit that kind of direction?
So I've adjusted kind of my thoughts over the years on that. I don't think it's much different than coxing an able-bodied athlete at this point. I just think that by coxing para athletes, I've gotten a lot more specific with what I say and a lot better at verbalizing what I want to happen. And so that's the same thing with coaching too. It's you don't like, maybe the fixed seat athletes you coach slightly differently, but with coxing at least, it's very much, I mean, there are a couple things that like you adjust, but it's not necessarily adjusting any way that you cox or anything like that. A lot of these athletes that were in my boat rode in their college programs. And so it's like, they're not used to having any accommodations. They're not used to anyone saying anything different to them. And so you don't. You just get a lot more specific because like when I was in Rio and before, there was a limitation in the boat that any blind athlete or visually impaired athlete had to wear goggles, blackout goggles. And so as a coxswain, I had to tell them where they were on the course, where the other boats were on the course, that sort of thing, which is always good for rowers to know. But I got really good at doing that. And then after that year, the goggles got pulled away, so they no longer had to wear goggles. And I just kept coxing the same way because it really just honed my skills as a coxswain versus actually changing the way I coxed.
What kind of feedback do you look for from athletes like that?
In the boat or on land?
In the boat, but I guess post race.
Yeah, I think post race, the athletes that had a visual impairment would tell me, oh yeah, that was great coxing. Like I knew everything that was going on. I could make a picture in my mind of where we were, everything like that. But if they say, I kind of lost it at this point, or yeah, I had no clue where that finish line was, I was just going. That's kind of a sign that like, okay, I didn't do a good enough job. I got to get more specific with what I'm saying and when I'm saying it. And they'll also tell you like, oh yeah, like the 250 meter in mark, I didn't realize we were, or 500 meter in, I thought we were at the 1,000. And you could be like, okay, well, I got to get better at calling that then. That sort of thing.
Does it have anything to do with their stroke pattern, or is it more a timing thing?
No, it's more just so that they can expend the energy where they're planning on in the race. Because you're not going to go all out in the first 500 meters. And you're not going to hold off in the last 500 meters. So it's really just about them pacing themselves throughout the race, and also just knowing where the other boats are too.
So we have less than a minute. I'm going
That's
to
fine.
end this
You
one.
want to leave and then come back in?
Yeah.
Okay.
See you in a bit.
Ayo.
So we were talking about the ways that you change your direction and receive feedback from adaptive rowers.
Yeah.
Did anyone tell you how to work through that process, or was it really just trial and error?
The rowers. And that's like with any crew. The rowers will tell you, hopefully, if they need something to help them perform better. And I think that's also about the relationship building between the coxswain and the crew. Because if you don't get to know your rowers on a personal level, they won't feel comfortable telling you something. Or they'll take too much control of telling you stuff and give you too much feedback, which doesn't help you, but sort of kind of degrades you almost. And so it's really about that like rower coxswain communication to learn.
Can you give me an example of feedback that would not be helpful?
Say that one more time, sorry.
Can you give me an example of feedback that would not be helpful?
I think that like when a rower says something to the effect of, well, that race sucked, you got to do better. Or like, yeah, your calls were horrible, Jenny. That sort of feedback doesn't really help me because it's like, well, great, what was horrible about them? Give me a little more specific, give me something to work with here, people. And so that would be like anything that's really vague, or overstated. Like every single call you made was too long. I don't know, I'm just making something up. And it's like, okay, so literally you hate my coxing. And like that doesn't help. It helps a little bit, but not as much as like, oh, you made this call around like the 500, I think, or something like that. Like you made a call in there that said something, and it just like, I didn't quite understand what you were trying to tell me, or like it wasn't detailed enough, with where we were in the race. Something like that would be way more helpful to me.
Do you have film that you can watch that aligns with your instruction?
I had like previous races that I would watch, with crews that I might be racing again, or like videos that were taken during practice of our boat, or like a race, something like that. I think that to improve my coxing the most, just listening to myself. And you're, in a way, you're your own worst critic. A tip that I got is if you listen to yourself and you get bored listening to yourself, the rowers won't listen to you.
I think that's pretty solid advice.
So just, which is really hard hearing yourself recorded, because it's almost like very personal as a coxswain. And so it's really hard to do that, but I think it's so helpful, especially when you're first learning how to cox and honing your skills.
What are the basics in terms of knowledge base that you need to cox?
I think basics would be just sort of how to steer a rudder, how a boat moves, that sort of thing. Next basics would just be the simple calls in rowing to stop the boat, to start the boat, the seats in the boat. That type of knowledge is, if you can do that, you can cox. It may not be good coxing, but it will be safe coxing. And safety is like first and foremost as a coxswain. And then after that, you can start building up your repertoire of what to tell rowers, or kind of like basic phrases to tell people during a race, basic phrases to tell rowers during a practice. And then from that, you can start getting boat feel. And boat feel is like what I was talking about before, with you put a blade in at a wrong time and the coxswain feels it and tells you immediately. Or, oh yeah, that worked, the boat's moving faster. Being able to tell those minute changes is sort of the final step in honing your coxing skills, because then you can relay that information to the rowers.
How many hours of practice does it take to feel that minutia?
I have no clue. A lot. No, it definitely, I mean, your first year coxing, if you've never rowed, it helps if you've rowed before and you've heard of coxing, and you get a little bit of an idea of what to do and what to say, and then it's more focused on like steering, and then you hone your skills more. But I mean, I probably didn't have until boat feel until like I started coxing in 2008, so probably 2012 was the first time I really started getting confident in my boat feel. And then I would say I was really confident in my boat feel by probably 2015.
Okay, so that's a
like
solid,
7 years.
like a solid amount of time.
Yeah, and that's like after 2 days for at least 3 years. And then like 2 days, 3 days, some like just as much as you can get in a boat, really.
So you mentioned that you knew kind of how to lead because you had already been a rower.
Yeah.
Are there coxswains who come in not rowing before?
Yeah. Yeah. Most coxswains do not row before they cox. Because especially when you come in from at a high school level, even a college level, when you're my height and weight, you're often just pegged as a coxswain. And I personally think it's crucial that every coxswain does a 2K at least once in their first year. Even if they epically fail horribly at it, just so that they know how the rower feels. Because it's really hard to gain those skills if you don't know what's going on with your athletes. And so I think that every coxswain should learn how to row if they are able to, or at least sit down with rowers and see, like, how are you feeling? What helps? Like, if you don't actually know how to row as a coxswain, it's really helpful to, like, it's going to take a lot more time and really helpful, but really just sitting down with rowers, and talking with them, seeing how they feel, seeing where they're at, getting with them on land while they do things. Like, it's a lot more challenging to grow as a coxswain if you don't know how to row, or just the basics of how to row, and then like what your rower is going through during a 2K.
And then moving from coxing to coaching, is that a smooth transition?
For me, it was, because I've been coaching for a while. I mean, the reason that I got into Vesper Boat Club with only like a year and a half coxing experience was because I had been a coach the prior summer, and I had coaching experience, which is I actually think that helped me coxing too, because then I knew how to communicate with the coach and I knew what coaches were saying, what they expected. So I think that it's a lot easier transition from coxswain to coach than it is rower to coach for the most part.
Yeah. And then how did your experience in Rio translate into what you helped do in Tokyo?
I think that, I mean, obviously it was way different with COVID in Tokyo, like way different. But the main thing that I took away from Rio, and my favorite part about Rio, because you compete at world championships, like you see other teams, like all of the hoopla is awesome, but the people of Rio and the fans really made it for me. And the experience that I had in Rio, like, yes, winning a silver medal absolutely was cherry on top. And no, I never want anyone to take that away from me. But going into Tokyo, my mentality with the athletes, that I was coaching, the one athlete I was coaching, and then the other athletes that were part of Team USA in the rowing, was very much an experience based. Like, they're not going to have the fans this year. How can I, as a coach, make this experience something that they will remember forever? And so that was sort of how I went into Tokyo as a coach.
What is the PR1 W1X classification?
That's the para rowing one. So that's the arms and shoulders.
Okay.
And women's is the W. And then 1X tells you how many people are in the boat.
Oh,
And whether or not they have a coxswain. So like PR3 mixed 4 plus would be PR3, the LTA. Mixed, because it's 2 men, 2 women. And then the 4 is the number of people in the boat. And the plus means they have a coxswain.
Oh,
So
okay.
it can either be a plus, which is a coxswain, a minus, which is no coxswain. And both the plus and the minus are 1 oar, generally speaking. Or it can be an X, which means no coxswain, 2 oars.
Okay.
So you can have like a 4X, you can have a 2X, you can have a 1X. So 1 person, 2 person, 4 person, 2 oars. And then you can have a 2 person minus, which is a pair, 1 oar. You can have a 4 person minus, which is a 4 person boat, no coxswain. And then an 8 person plus, or in Paralympic side, a 4 person plus.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your ambassadorship in Athletes for Hope. That sounds really cool.
It's amazing. I actually saw them on one of the emails that I had received probably in like 2016, 2017. And I was like, this sounds awesome. I'm going to like see what it's about. And then just through working with them, I was able this past year to be one of their mental health ambassadors, which was just amazing, because I'm very passionate about mental health advocacy, and just kind of telling my story a little bit too.
What does the whole Being Athlete program look like for you?
So I have been able to sort of do videos and speak to people about through the Whole Being Athlete program about my mental health journey and about my mental health disability and how that's affected me in both athletics, real life, but how it's also helped me as an athlete. And yeah, it's just been an amazing chance to really tell people, and don't like the word normal, but normalize mental health. Because I consider myself normal. We all have quirks. That's what makes us normal. Like, I feel like everybody's got something. It can be a physical disability. It can be mental health disability. It can be just that you're really scared to do a 2K because you know how much pain you're about to put yourself in. But everybody's got their quirks. And so I think having a quirk makes you normal. And that's what I consider my mental health disability. So the Athletes for Hope program and ambassadorship that I have really helps me to verbalize that to the public. And people who may not necessarily think the same way I do about that. But it's been really interesting to see sort of responses and feedback from people too. Because I've definitely just started really opening up about my mental health in the past couple years.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast is about athlete mental health. So I love when leaders come on and say, I'm going through something too. Because it's not just this athlete or athletes who don't put out as much. It's also people in higher positions. It's team captains. I mean, everyone's going through something, and that's why I love sitting down with athletes like you who would say, even though I am in this leadership position, I'm no different.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like the person next door. Like at your next door house. I'm just like your teammate. I am your teammate in some cases. The teammate that you never knew had a mental health disability until I told you. So why should all of a sudden, if I disclose the fact that I have a disability, why should that jade the way you look at me? Like, what makes that different?
Yeah, I mean, it's just I love this space so much.
Oh yeah, me too. It's awesome.
And I'm so glad that you could sit down and talk to me about this. You are, I think, only the second rower I've had on this podcast. And you bring such an interesting perspective because you're the leader. I think you, at some point in one of the articles I read, you were like, I'm kind of the team captain without being like officially captain. And I was like, that's an interesting perspective because it's not really a hierarchy, but you are in a leadership position.
Yeah, you definitely are. I mean, I think rowers can also be captains. I think that that's also part of the challenge of coxing too, is how do you balance that and still be able to lead your team, or have one of the rowers lead your team, and be okay with that and still be a good coxswain. So it's interesting, but yeah, I think that definitely it's an interesting perspective, and has definitely played a role in my mental health. So
In what scenario would a rower lead that conversation?
like the mental health conversation, or just like a
The
team?
the team
I
conversation.
think, yeah, I think rowers can step up and say, like, be team players. And like, yes, the coxswain is a different position, but you're still an athlete. And that's the main thing. And I think especially in rowing, that's I think why you say, like, why I might say team captain without being the captain. Because like a rower can be a leader, I can be a leader on the team. We can have two leaders on the team. And bring and unite a boat together, because I think that sometimes it's also hard as a coxswain being a leader because you can't relate to the rowers. in every single way. And so it's nice to have rowers stand up and take leadership and talk to their other teammates and be like, yeah, let's go, come on team, like whatever you want to do to be a leader. And so I think in that instance, sometimes it's more helpful to have rowers step up than have a coxswain say something. And so it's all about giving that sort of give and take with your rowers.
What's the most important life lesson you've learned through your rowing experience? I'm going to put you on the spot right now. But
no, it's okay. Resiliency and how to be resilient, I think is the absolute best life lesson that I've learned, because it's really hard when negative things happen. And especially when you put yourself out there for the entire world to judge. Well, it feels like the entire world. It's probably just your coach, but you put your entire like soul on the line and they don't take it. And it's like, how do you bounce back from that? And I even tell the people like my staff right now that work for me, it's not about the mistakes you make, it's about how you come back from them and what you do after them. Because mistakes, negative things are going to happen. There's no getting around it. Nobody leads a perfect life. Nobody. And it's not necessarily like the fact that happened, it's what you do after. And so that resiliency has led me back into coxing in 2013, but then again, back into coaching in 2020. And I have realized that I am much stronger as a person, as an individual, than I ever thought I was.
Epic.
Boom, mic drop. No.
So going off of that, when you had this string, years and years and years of silver medals without a gold, what was going through your head when you just couldn't?
Wow, thanks for reminding me of that.
Sorry. We have to talk about it.
We do. It's like the elephant, one of the elephants in the room. No, I think it's just coming back from that silver and saying, what can I do to get better? What can I do to make that gap lessen? What can I do to get stronger? And make the boat move faster. And that was my mentality every year. It wasn't like, oh God, I don't want another silver. It was like, how can I make this boat the fastest boat that it can be? And what can I do better from previous years to do that?
Is there anything else that you think that I missed about your story?
I mean, I would love to talk about my mental health a little bit.
Yes.
If that's something that you want to chat about.
Yeah. So this is normally, my questions for you are done. This is normally the part of the interview where I open it up. If you have anything that you want to say, any stories, tangents you'd like to go on, please, this is the floor.
Like I said before, I really have started talking a lot recently about my mental health disability. And so I have severe obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. And so when I say, oh my God, I'm still OCD, it's like actually true. But it's been really interesting. And I think that this is really interesting because when I first started coxing, so I didn't officially get diagnosed with OCD until I was a sophomore in college. And I didn't realize it could be a mental health disability until I was 27 years old and covered by the ADA. And when I was first starting to cox for the national team, it was extremely stressful. I was going through therapy, learning how to cope, learning how to work through my OCD and work with it rather than having it kind of lead my life. And this was all while college was happening, which was a hot mess and probably the reason why I didn't like college that much. But in the second year when I came back, I disclosed to my coach that I had OCD. And part of my OCD is like, if you do this, then something bad will happen in your life, or you won't get this. And that year, I ended up not making the team. And I was devastated, and thought that it was because I had disclosed my OCD to my coach, which I still don't know if that was part of it, but I'd like to hope not. And then the following year, I came back again to the same coach and ended up getting lied to by the coach as to why I didn't make the vote. And after I was told I didn't make the vote, without even realizing it, I started speeding out of the parking lot, and stopped myself when I got probably about 3/4 of the way through the parking lot, realized what was going on, and told myself, just get back to the host family house. And I don't know if that was OCD, if that was depression, what that was, if that was just like, holy crap, my world is gone. But my dad actually had to fly down to Virginia that evening from New Jersey to come pick me up and drive me home, because I didn't think I could drive myself home without potentially going off the road.
Wow.
On purpose.
Right.
And so my dad drove me home, and then I swore that I would never tell a coach again after that. And it was actually like a little bit on the track of OCD, but also on the track of rowing, and resiliency. It was that fall, not really on the track of OCD. I'm sort of getting off track here, but that's okay. I'm just taking you through my story. We'll just go with it. Enjoy.
Absolutely.
And so that fall, I went to head of the Charles Regatta, which I mentioned before, and saw 2 of my blind athletes, completely blind athletes. And I was still depressed at this point. Like, it had been 3-4 months and I was still depressed. And I was talking to them and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want to continue in high performance training, blah, 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 blah. This was 2012. And I just not made the Paralympic team. And they said, while I was talking to them about this, they said, Jenny, stop. And I was like, what? And they go, we can hear you smiling as you're talking about this. And it was that moment that I knew that I loved this sort of training and needed to get back into it. And that's when I flipped the switch, moved down to Oklahoma, because that's where the training center was. The coach ended up getting laid off or fired or whatever you want to call it. And then the boat went up to Boston. And I still refused to tell a coach. I didn't tell anyone about my OCD. I didn't tell anyone about my depression, any coaches. Obviously, like my parents knew, that kind of thing. So supportive of everything. And it wasn't till, so I had this new coach from 2013 to 2018. So about 5 years, 6 years of coach athlete relation building. She was also my boss at work. Which, for better or worse, I will say though, when it actually came down to national team stuff, it was like she was Jekyll and Hyde. Like, boss at work was one thing, national team stuff totally different. Like, she just could flip a switch and turn off any type of relation she had with anybody. And so that was actually pretty cool to see, but also awful, because I was like, maybe she likes me, so I'll get in the boat. But it wasn't ever that, which made me feel good too. But anyways, then in 2019, she ended up leaving as the coach, and a new coach took over. And I tried out and didn't make it with this coach. She kind of took her coxing from her university that she was coaching at. And I ended up not making the boat. And it wasn't until 2020 that I sat down with my former coach and told her about my OCD. And it took me 7-8 years to disclose it to her, because I knew at that point nothing bad could happen. The worst had already happened. Like, it's like, but it's interesting because I don't think any athlete should have to go through that. I don't think any athlete should have to worry about disclosing their mental health situation and worry that there might be repercussions for disclosing it to a coach, because I think that a coach can absolutely help you and should be able to help you find the right resources, support you so that you can perform to your best. And the best coaches are able to do that versus judging you or worrying that you're lesser or weaker than another athlete just because you have mental health issue, challenge, whatever. And so it's like really interesting that I didn't say that to my coach, but when I did tell her, she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, really? I waited 8 years, 7 years to get an oh, okay. You could at least be like, really? And I'd be like, yeah, can you believe it? Like, no, okay. It's like, I could have told you earlier. You wouldn't have cared. Dang it. But like, it's just like, you just don't know as an athlete. And I think that space is opening up more and more with upper level athletes and more well-known athletes coming out about that, about their mental health. But I really think like it needs to be athletes talking, feeling okay to talk about it, and coaches and teammates giving athletes a space to talk about it. Because in reality, it's a sport. And for the most part, the sports that we do don't define our lives solely. And that's another thing that I've had to learn too, is like, there are other aspects to my life that define it, not just Paralympic rowing. And so that's been a really tough lesson to learn, to sort of realize that I have multiple identities, which also sounds really sketchy. Sorry about that.
Are you firmly a coach now?
Yes.
Okay.
I do a little bit of coxing on the side.
Cool.
And I mean, obviously, I love to toy with the idea that I'll go back to coxing competitively one day. Do I actually think that'll happen? But just because I found other avenues in my life now, that I love, and I identify in different ways. And so it's not the same as it used to be. I don't view myself as an athlete first and foremost anymore. I view myself as an athlete. I view myself as a leader, a manager, a director, an advocate. Like, there's so many different ways. And I wish somebody had told me that when I first, like, when I was involved in that, like, getting into the upper level and staying at that upper level. It's like, you're more than just one thing. So that's another piece of advice. I know I've gone like off tangents talking about everything, but that's what cut and paste is for, right? No, just kidding.
But seriously, I feel like I talk to so many athletes from different sports, from different countries, different age ranges, and I feel like I can almost exactly pinpoint that we're going to bring up athlete identity at some point in the interview.
Yeah.
It has been a constant. We
Isn't
are
it?
almost 75 weeks into this podcast, and it comes up every single week. It's like clockwork.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And you're in a sport that you can also do for the rest of your life to some degree. I mean,
I can be competitive for the rest of my life. I mean, they have like World Masters games. They have races for masters. Like, I can do it at a competitive level until I don't want to do it anymore. And I can coach competitively until someone out coaches me. But yeah, it's a really interesting sport in that regard, because, and it's also, I mean, that's also hard though too, because then it's like, where do you ever, is it ever a firm line in the sand that you no longer identify as an athlete? Is it ever like a firm, like, I mean, you can, there's some sports where when you're done competing, your body's done. I can go get it back into a boat right now and go compete again.
Yeah.
It's like, unless I can't sit in a boat anymore, it makes it challenging too, to sort of move on.
Yeah. One of the very first episodes of this podcast I did was with a collegiate swimmer. He's a sprint swimmer. Yeah. And he was like, once I graduated from college and realized I was not going to do this competitively, the next time I got into the pool, I was like, I had to actively tell myself, you don't have to train like this anymore. You can just swim laps. Like, lackadaisical laps are okay. He had
It's
to
so
like
fun.
totally reconfigure how he viewed his
Yeah,
sport. It's really interesting.
it's really hard. And I'm like crazy competitive. And it's
I get that vibe.
I I don't know if that's a good thing. But I think that I will never not be competitive. And I will never not want, like, I just got to blow up paddleboard for myself. Because I needed to find some other form of exercise other than walking, running. And so I got to blow up paddleboard, and I'm out there on the Charles River paddling away. And I'm like, I'm gonna be the next world champion and blow up paddleboard. And then I'll like see people walking along the like pathway along the Charles River, and I'll race them as they walk to like see if I can beat them. It's bad, but it's really hard to switch off that competitive mentality. Like, I can just paddle for fun, but I don't want to.
Yeah, it's difficult, especially when you're in a sport that's not a team sport. I mean, like you were saying, things like football and soccer,
Mm-hmm.
once you lose the other players on your team, you lose the ability to play competitively. You're not in a sport like that.
No, it's like the boat changes every year. You have to be ready for any boat, any seat, anytime. So they're really like, yes, it's a massive team sport. When you're actually in a boat, a set lineup, but it's also like hard because it's always changing sometimes too.
I do have one more question about
Mhm.
that kind of OCD perfectionist mindset. How did that shift the way that you approached leading this boat?
I think if anything, it made me, once I started talking about it, made me feel more human and made me help the athletes in my boat and myself connect more when I disclosed it to them. And I think that by feeling comfortable enough to disclose it, that was actually a way that I changed my leadership. Because it made me more of a peer leader in a way. And I think that with that perfectionist mindset too, like, I don't think, I think it's made me uber competitive, but I don't know if it's necessarily like directly guided my leadership, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That was the last question I had to ask. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, any foundations you would like to support? I'm going to check when your episode comes out.
So I currently work for the National Council on Independent Living. And I am loving being a part of the independent living movement. And so I think that would be like my main shout out right now, because it's one of those things where the independent living movement, and NCIL as we call it, really focuses on ensuring that people with disabilities have the best opportunities to live on their own and not be institutionalized, not go into sheltered workshops, not go into nursing homes, transition out of nursing homes, that sort of thing. And so I'm really passionate about that, especially identifying with the disability community, and like knowing that if I lived 50 years ago, 70 years ago, my life would not be nearly the same as what it is now. I'd probably be in an institution.
Yeah.
So knowing that the independent living movement has done that for me in a way, in the ADA, and really, like, I think that I just also love being a part of it. So yeah, supporting NCIL, supporting the independent living movement,
Yeah,
and of course Olympic stuff. But
I'll put links to all of those in the show notes once this gets published. And I just looked, this episode will come out on July 27th. So you have about a month.
sweet,
Um,
right in the
between
middle of our
now,
conference.
between now and then, if anything changes, please direct message me, email me. Also, if I can get a picture of you, I can use for social media.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
one more
definitely.
thing, I have a YouTube playlist going every week I ask the athlete that I have on for one song that either pumps them up or chills them out, regulates their mental health in some way.
I don't know if I should be embarrassed by this or not.
The
But
song,
my
the song
go
choices are incredible.
okay,
So
then I won't be embarrassed by this. My go-to song when I was first starting a coxswain national team before races was actually Some Nights by Fun.
oh, that's a good choice.
So that's like my go-to, like if I'm in a crappy mood, I'll turn that on. That one, or oh my gosh, now I'm forgetting. Nope, I'm not even gonna say it because I forgot the name of it.
We'll,
Just like
we'll
blanking.
take Some Nights.
We'll take Some Nights by Fun.
That's a good addition. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? We have about 2.5 minutes left. If there's not, that's okay, and I'll talk to you this time in July.
Perfect. No, there's nothing
Hope you
else
love the episode.
I want to say. I'm excited. This was awesome. Thank you so much for
Yay.
having me.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. This is just such an interesting perspective. I'm so happy that you sat down with me and talked through it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yay.
Thank you again.
I'll talk to you once this is posted in July.
Perfect.
Bye.
Bye.